I'm Lisa Stone. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Parenting Aces. Welcome to the Parenting Aces podcast. I don't know if you've been pulling these late nights like I have watching the Australian Open, but oh my gosh, I am so tired, but so pumped up about watching these amazing players in action. Going to the Australian Open is definitely on my bucket list, and I'm really hoping to get down there for the slam at some point in the not too distant future. But for now, I have to just be satisfied with watching these amazing athletes on TV and following along online. But anyway, if any of you are down there live and in person, I am super jealous, and I hope you have just a phenomenal time. So this week we are talking with Aleksey Zharinov, and Aleksey was born and grew up in Siberia, of all places, and found his way to the U.S. to play college tennis when he was a teenager, and has since made his home here, developed his skills, and has been coaching. And his most recent endeavor is to publish a book, and it's called The Russian System, a proven method for raising a world-class tennis player. And graciously, Aleksey is offering a very nice discount to the Parenting Aces audience, so be sure and check out the show notes this week to find out how to get your discount and your copy of the Russian System book. But it was very interesting to talk to Aleksey. I've never had the opportunity to speak at length like this with someone who grew up in Russia. And I've read, several different articles and accounts of growing up in the Russian tennis system, and learning about Spartak and the emphasis on technika, which you'll hear Aleksey say much more beautifully than I just did. But I was really fascinated to hear his story and to give him the opportunity to share it with y'all. So I hope you enjoy this week's episode with Aleksey Zharinov. And with that, I will be quiet and let you delve right into this week's show.
Aleksey Zharinov, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Parenting Aces podcast. I'm so glad to finally get the chance to speak with you.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
So I love to have my guests give a little bit of background on their life in tennis, especially my first-time guests. So I'll just ask you, how did you get started in this game?
Well, I grew up in Novosibirsk, Russia. It's a big town in Siberia. It's actually a capital of Siberia. And my first sport was gymnastics. So I was doing that from age 6 to 8. And then the truth is that was no fun at all. And the coaches were making us cry and stretching us like crazy. It was like all serious. So needless to say, it wasn't a sport I was looking forward to participating every week. So my dad was a jack of all trades. He played a whole bunch of different sports, and one of his friends was coaching tennis. So one day he kind of asked me, "Hey, you wanna try tennis?" Because he thought that I'm gonna like break my neck doing gymnastics. That was his reasoning. So then I started going to tennis classes, and given my gymnastics background, I was way more athletic and coordinated than most of the kids. And literally in a matter of months, I was already rallying and playing against high school kids. It was so quickly I got better, and then him and I stayed afterwards and kind of practiced extra outside of my classes. So I got hooked, and that just kind of started us on this long journey of playing tennis. So my dad eventually became my coach, and he coached me for 10 years. He kind of went through a stage of trying to delegate the coaching to other people. Eventually, he decided to do it himself, and he kind of learned the technique. He talked to all the best Russian coaches at the tournaments, and kind of gathered his coaching database, if you will, and and became quite good at it. Eventually, it was some bumps in the road here and there, but he eventually actually quit his day job, and now he does coaching full time. So
wow.
Going back to
kind of the Richard Williams approach to bringing up a great tennis player, huh?
Yeah, it was. I'm not too familiar with the Richard Williams, but it's more and more of a hands-on parenting, and there's some similarities with Richard Williams, but he's done a lot, and he would take us to tournaments. He found sponsor this rich businessman. So my dad convinced him to invest in me, and so I went to Italy to train at the academy after high school. I was going to ITF tournaments all over Europe, and it was. I mean, I can't really overstate how much he's done. Not only for coaching, but also like as a manager and the fitness coach and what have you.
That's amazing. And so you wound up coming to the States eventually. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So right after I got back from Italy, from training there when I was 18, I believe, and I came back home to Russia, and there's really not much happening there in terms of academies or any kind of thing. So I was already playing like professionally. So you have to go, travel. So I got there, and there's really nothing for me there. And I talked to one of my friends. He was working with this American businessman who's from Minnesota originally, but he moved to Russia. He married his kids, so he's totally like all pretty much all Russian now. But his family is from Minnesota, so my friend convinced him to kind of take a chance and invest in my trip to the States and to see how good I really was, because it's a big fish in a small pond kind of a deal in Siberia, and how would that translate to a big market like U.S. So he's like, whatever, we'll my family will meet you there at the airport or wherever. They will put you a hotel and arrange some players to play to see how good you are. So I came to the States for literally 1 month. I had a stamp in my passport. I showed up. This family met me. They didn't know nothing about tennis whatsoever. So they got me like a couple lessons at the club, just like local pros to hit with. So I played with them, and I think the second one was best friends with the head coach for the University of Minnesota, and they got in touch. The second pro guy called the coach and said, "Hey, this guy here from Siberia just kind of showed up. You should take a look." So then, following day, I come out, play with the University of Minnesota team, and I beat, I think, 3 of the top 6 guys in that practice. And that naturally, raised the coaches' eyebrows, and they like pretty much offered me a scholarship like immediately. So in that staying, I took all the English tests, and the rest is history. Been played amazing college career, great, amazing fun, and that would.
And having grown up in Siberia, I guess being in Minnesota wasn't a huge shock in terms of the weather, right? I mean, you were used to that freezing cold weather.
Yeah, it's funny. Everybody says you used to it, but you really never get used to it. But it is very, very similar to where I was from. So yeah, it was not shocking from the weather standpoint.
And so, since your college career, what have you been doing?
Well, after I finished my college, I tried playing pro. I think it started like in the summers between my college years, where I could do it, and then I played a little bit afterwards. And then pretty much right after, I I started coaching in 2005. That's where I kind of started coaching full time at the club in Minnesota, and then worked at the country club there for 7 years on my work visa. So I've been full time coaching since 2005. So it makes it for 12 years now.
And
so
is your focus mostly with juniors or with adults, or a mix of both?
Well, it's historically it's been all juniors. Given my background, I kind of naturally attracted, kids who actually wanted to do something with tennis, and aspiring college players and pros and whatever. The serious-minded kids. Those are usually I personally gravitated towards myself as well, but I did a mixture of both. I obviously work at the country club. Probably the majority of the kids there, are not, trying to win Wimbledon. But,
right. So you've written a book, and I'd love for you to talk about your book and the inspiration behind it, and what you're hoping parents and players and other coaches can learn from your experience.
Yeah, so like I said, I've been coaching since 2012, and I've coached in many states in U.S., and I also coached a little bit in Italy, but I definitely seen the coaching approach that my dad used and what they used in Russia. And I just honestly kind of this idea of this Russia system book stemmed from the kind of feeling that a lot of parents are not quite getting the idea of what it would take for their kids to actually succeed in tennis, in a competitive tennis. So my goal was kind of give them the clear picture and clear direction, and kind of open their eyes a little bit, and put the right priorities in their tennis training and their kids training. So yeah, just kind of also see a lot of coaches are not kind of doing their job well in my eyes. So just kind of between those two, I was like, man, I got to do something, and really try to do for our parents what my dad eventually learned and did for me.
So let's talk specifics. I mean, one of the things I love is right off the bat in your book, you say the development of a junior tennis player can cost over $100,000. Are you sure you're on the right track? And I love that. I mean, there it is right in your face. This is an expensive proposition, and parents need to go into it with their eyes open. And you, from the get-go, as a coach, I feel, put that out for the parents. So you ask the question right from the beginning, are you willing to make that type of financial commitment for your child to reach his or her highest level in the sport?
Yeah, well, that's kind of the, that's the thing. It is extremely expensive for what I see. A lot of parents spend, like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, and actually the result is not that great, because it's not just the time, it's not just the money, it's the training, how it is done. It has to be effective. At the end of the day, that's what the coaches should be doing. The kids should be progressing. They should be learning right stuff. And if they're not, like I talk in my book, they're actually becoming worse off in the long run, because I'm doing, bad habits and bad training is extremely difficult, which I know, by my own experience. Oh yeah,
right.
That's the whole, the whole thing for my motivation. It is very expensive. It is time consuming, and the parents better do their due diligence and their homework, and that's kind of what my book is about. Just give them some resources, how to see things maybe a little bit more clearly, and steer their kids and not waste so much time and money.
Mm-hmm. So what makes the Russian system so different?
Well, the first and foremost is it focuses on technique. I believe a lot more than other systems that are out there. Yeah, the technique is really the cornerstone, and it has to be at the very, very high level, because since we're talking about competitive, say Division I or professional tennis players, now you enter in the world market. It's good enough or average is not going to cut. So the quality has to be extremely high just to break through all other players that are out there. So technique in focus on that is I would say number one, and number two, it kind of stems from that. In order to achieve it at the very advanced level, you start from simple and you progress. So it has to be done in progression. You can't just start playing matches with the good technique. You drill. You actually start with shadow stroking. That was very, very common in my household, and I know in Russia it's really widespread. And just go all the way down to rallying and match play and try to keep that form. But I think that more broadly, just would like to have a clear priority established for my readers, for the parents, because it's gonna establish this overall arch, like how particular you have to be with all areas of training if you want your kid to succeed at national level. So yeah, those probably the three biggest components.
I think a lot of my my audience is familiar with the Spartak Tennis Club and kind of the history of Spartak, and Daniel Coyle wrote about it, and I've written about it too, and various articles on parentingaces.com. And one of the things that really jumped out at me about Spartak and the training that goes on there, at least historically, is the fact that, as you said, this whole idea of technique, and what's the Russian word? It's technika or something?
Yeah,
is that right?
Technika. Yeah, it's very good.
Yes. It sounds much better when you say it.
Yeah, you're doing a good job.
Okay, good. So this whole notion of making sure that the technique is perfect, that it can be replicated over and over and over ad nauseum before even a child's allowed to use a racket to make contact with a ball. The shadow swinging is huge in the training process and perfecting that technique. And until that technique is perfected, the child doesn't move forward. So, in the U.S., I wonder how that would fly, because we put such an emphasis on making sure that our kids are having fun, especially the little ones, when they're first starting out in the sport. And so translating kind of this Russian system of technique and, repetition after repetition into a U.S. training environment that is almost, it requires that there be a fun element to the process. How do you do that? Is that a challenge for you, or do you just say, you know what, this is the way I do it, and if this is something you want, then you're going to buy into it, and if it's not, there are plenty of other people out there doing it a different way?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Well, first off, you kind of touched on it. Parents and kids who come to me, they usually already have motivation. Especially the kids. If they don't have the drive and really desire to get good, there's really not much I can do. I mean, if they just get in the kicking and screaming, and then I will impose on them shadow stroking and the drill, and that's just not going to be going anywhere. So the kids who I tend to attract actually really want to be good at tennis. So for them, it's in a way, it's maybe not always fun, but it is a fun aspect for them to get better and to be really challenged. That's kind of the ideal quality that I'm looking for, and actually quite a few kids that I'm coaching at the moment possess. So for them, it's going through all this growing pains and learning the right mechanics, and that's part of the fun. But in terms of putting it on a bigger U.S. scale, I mean, it's a hard question. It has to do with the individuals and what the families set their goals as. It's as simple as that. If the goal is to play at the high level, you have to be willing to pay a higher price. And if they don't, it's totally fine. To each his own. And there's definitely, tennis has a lot of shades of, different levels. Playing for fun, playing competitively, and all in between. And it's totally, everybody can exist. But I mean, I try to just explain on the first point. I just like to keep it lighthearted and in between my drilling sets, and just kind of joke around as much as I can to kind of I call it the brain rest, because like both the students and myself are thinking whatever the length of the set, 10-15 minutes, so we just kind of all like in it, working, adjusting every ball. Okay, you got to do this, do that. I'm trying to relate my information in all these different ways, just to make sure they get it. They trying to receive it and implement it. So it's like really tough mental, exercise. And then when we're done with picking up balls, we just kind of joke around and just let them rest a little bit and kind of tune out, their brain a little bit, and then we go back in. So that's just kind of my way of helping them kind of not lose their marbles.
No, I get it. I mean, the training process can be very intense and very exhausting, and so I think that's awesome that you keep that in mind. I'm curious, with the Russian approach to tennis development, how important is the private tennis lesson versus a group session? And how do you suggest that families, kind of construct their week or their month in terms of having a one-on-one session with a coach versus being in a group setting versus match play, for example, and tournaments? Yeah. Let's add that in too.
Yeah. Sure, that's not a good question. So usually when parents come to me with a question, with similar question, how many lessons should we do? And I usually tell them, well, when I grew up in Russia, there was my brother and I. My brother played with me, so we were kind of growing up playing together and learning together. So him and I had a either private or semi-private lesson with my dad every day for 3-4 hours for 10 years. So that's what you kind of looking at, like you competing with somebody who's doing that kind of workload somewhere else, like I was doing. So closest to that you can get in your resources, and you don't have to do it, but the closest to, you can get is better. And I'll say, it depends if kids go to school or not. You could do ideally probably a private lesson a day and like a hitting session a day. So that'll be probably the best scenario if kids don't go to school, if they homeschool, for example. So maybe 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. That was my schedule for a really long time. But all of it has to be, how the, a lot of parents that I have right now, a lot of kids, they'll do, lesson or, like 2 or 3 times a week, but then also they go somewhere else, and that's where they come back to me, and things go away so quickly. So it's like a lot of times we play catch up. So I get them to a good level, and then I don't see them maybe for a few days, for maybe a week or two, and then they come back. The bad habits back. So it's like always kind of backtracking. It's nice, to advance, and ideally, the coach will be doing private lessons and supervising the group, lessons as well. So the technique and the quality will stay, be supervised. So they can't really just do kind of whatever they want to do, in rally, which happens all the time.
So in an ideal situation, you're saying 5 days a week you would have a one-on-one session with a developing player, and then those same 5 days a week they would have also a group session where they're drilling and playing points. What about incorporating match play and tournament play in that schedule? How do you do that?
Well, it'll depend on how far along the players are. So in my book, I give a little like progression, which I believe is the most effective. Like when you're growing up 10, 12 years old, you don't need to play so many tournaments. The way a lot of kids nowadays just all focus on tournaments and the all the technique and the fitness. The important stuff kind of oftentimes overlooked. So I'll do, you can do matches, like say, if you do private lesson in the morning, and you do healing session in the afternoon with, say, like, 3-4 kids, then you can play points, and you can play, you can play sets in that time. And then, depends on the age, and then you can take, once in a couple of months, if you're 10 or 12 years old, just go out there and play a tournament, learn a bunch, and come back and we work further. But you don't necessarily have to play so many tournaments. Is I guess is my point. You can put yourself in that pressure against kids in practice.
Right. Yeah, for sure. One of the things that you also talk about in your book is the importance of playing other sports. And you mentioned at the beginning of this show that you started in gymnastics and switched to tennis. The culture in the U.S. has gotten so crazy with all youth sports, not just with tennis, where we're almost being forced to choose a sport by age 7 or 8 for our kids now. The sports are not flexible in terms of, you play this one in the fall for 6 or 8 weeks, and then you have a little break, and then you play that sport for 6 or 8 weeks, and then you take a little break and you play another sport for 6 or 8 weeks. We don't really have that anymore here in the U.S. And I'm curious how you guide the parents of your players about multiple sports and playing multiple sports, and what you feel the benefits are of playing those multiple sports.
Oh, sure. Well, when I talk to them about playing different sports, when I talk to my parents, it doesn't necessarily mean play organized and be in league, or join this team or that team, or it could be as simple as just going outside and like playing soccer, or just getting some of your friends and family and just exposing kids to a different environment that's also athletic. It just kind of requires a slightly different skill set. So a lot. I think I got quite a lot from playing soccer when I was growing up, because my brother and I just really loved doing it, and there was no organized soccer at all. We just played with a bunch of kids in our yard, and it was we a lot of times did it after those 2 practices that I mentioned. So we'll go, like after already been playing for like 4 or 5 hours of tennis, we'll go play another 3 hours of soccer at the end of it. So we're just going all crazy. But, you see a lot of professional tennis players, a lot of Europeans used to play soccer when they were growing up, and then they kind of made a choice, but they still like to play. I think getting just in different sports is expands your horizons, makes it more athletic. It's tremendous for footwork and sprinting, short bursts, and just overall coordination.
Sure.
So yeah,
I think.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the challenge then is to figure out how to kind of get back to that environment where kids just kind of get together without adults and play. And we just, our society really doesn't cater to that anymore. Even if you live in the suburbs in a neighborhood, I feel like everybody's constantly in their car going from this practice to that practice, rather than the kids just hanging out in the cul-de-sacs and, shooting hoops or kicking around a ball or playing tag or, all the things I did growing up. And
right.
It's a real shame. So, I feel like at some point soon, the pendulum is going to start to swing back the other way, because I think we're all starting to recognize the fact that our kids are developing injuries that, used to be adult onset injuries. Now they're showing up in, young kids, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're overtraining at such a young age and specializing at such a young age, and we're seeing more burnout. It'll be interesting to kind of watch the youth sports environment as a whole and see if we start to swing back toward child-led play as opposed to adult scheduled practices and lessons.
Yeah, that'll be quite interesting. I'm surprised we don't have like anything like that at local like parks, or my daughter is still very young, so I'm not as familiar with the whole system as you are. It'd be interesting, if by the time she kind of gets a little bit older, we can find something that she can just participate, just casually as a God willing, she plays tennis, and I can just introduce her to different sports, but not in a sort of organized and
right.
Schedule a little bit more flexible way.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I wanted to ask you too, because I've been involved in kind of an extensive conversation with several different coaches about the whole red, orange, green progression. And I'm wondering if that is part of the Russian system of training young players.
I would say definitely not. I mean, it's kind of, I was struck a little bit. I understand. I totally get where they're coming from. With the green dots and all, but there's tons of players that came out of U.S. In the 90s when I was watching those, Sampras, Agassi, Courier, Chang, Wheaton, Kriegstein, all those guys. Like none of those guys had green dotted balls. How do Rafa and Roger, like none of those guys had. I mean, they had clay courts. I mean, that's a separate story. That actually, I would say that could be a legit factor in U.S.
The lack of clay courts.
Yeah, I think the clay courts is really adding kind of that what they try to get with the green dots is just longer points, but also helps a lot with your balance and how you how you get to the ball and from that, like the longer rallies, longer, that requires you think, requires your, mental state to be very, very intense to sustain long rallies and so forth. So I think there's a lot of benefits, but I don't know about green dotted thing. I'm not a big fan of it.
So how do you manage that with your 10 and under players that you work with? Because the way the USTA tournament structure is here, you have to go through kind of that whole progression, right?
Yeah, they kind of make you go through, but for the first and foremost, like I mentioned earlier, when you're 10 and under, playing a lot of tournaments should be your last priority. That is not at all what you should be focusing your attention about. And if you do play, winning tennis tournaments is not essential. So you shouldn't be playing a lot, to begin with. But if you do, you always can go back to green dotted balls if you really, really, want to play and go back for a couple of practices or for, a few days leading up to the tournament, maybe a week or so. And just kind of get familiar with it.
You don't use those balls when you train your players?
I don't. I mean, my whole thing is, we are focusing with my kids on the results when they're 17, 16, 18 years old. So we need to be thinking what kind of skill set we're going to need to have at that time to be successful. Playing and winning green dot tournaments is whatever. It's not the goal. We work in technique and trying to get them to the high level in that department. And
right.
In a couple of years, it's not going to matter anyways.
You're very process oriented, obviously, and as opposed to results oriented, which I think is the right way to be. That's all the stuff I've read and the research I've seen points to the fact that process oriented training is much more effective long term than results oriented training. And so I think that's awesome, but I also know that parents like to see results, and one of the challenges for junior coaches is how to balance that whole process versus results or outcome in terms of, keeping players long term. And one of the things I'm trying to do with Parenting Aces is to help parents understand that it's not about winning in the 10s. It's not about winning in the 12s. It's not even about winning in the 14s. It's really not until the 16s and 18s where the winning is the issue. But at the same time, kids need to learn how to win, right? I mean, it's a mindset. It's an approach. And so how do you balance that with this process-oriented approach to training?
It's not a good question. You're full of good questions, Lisa.
I'm full of them today, aren't I?
Yeah. So that's it's definitely a challenge. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. You know, setting up good technical platform, you know, doesn't always guarantee you'll be a good player. I like to make distinction when I talk to my players, and I'll say there's a difference between a good tennis hitter and a good tennis player. So my, you know, the way I approach them and the way I try to help them is they have to see tennis for what it really is. Tennis fundamentally, and that's kind of one of my questions that I like to ask, and actually very few people get it on the first try. I do a open-ended kind of a blank kind of a question. I say tennis is and they usually say sport, you know, something like that. But rarely somebody says it's a game, but it is. You know, my dad instilled in me, and that's why playing out of sports kind of helps that aspect. It's a game. It's you tricking, outplaying, outsmarting the other guy, or the other girl. That's fundamentally what it's about. You know, the way you do it, you know, your technique, your mechanics and all that stuff. Those are just the tools of how you're gonna do it. But you know, I usually would talk to my players about that and try to instill that kind of a, you know, being cunning and being just using your mind, you know, as a tool, not in a nasty way or whatever, like cheating or anything like that, but just being aware that the mental aspect, you know, it's very important, and you know how you present yourself, how you use your body language to kind of impose some additional pressure, how you deal with the different match situations. We kind of go, you know, all through that, and you know that's why they should be playing tournaments like in the wherever 10s and 12s, like they're every now and then, whatever, like I said, once in a couple of months, month and a half, whatever, what have you. But because that exposing yourself to that environment kind of helps you grow, and that's the really major aspect why you should be even considering kind of playing at that age, is kind of gradually gaining some, you know, insights and mental techniques and kind of accelerating that all the way through 17, 18 years old.
Right. No, I mean, it's super important. And, you know, I like that you said that, you know, knowing how to hit, again, being a good hitter is very different from being a good player. And it's just such a good statement, and it's so true. There are a lot of people, and you look at it, even, you know, in collegiate tennis, everybody hits the ball well, right? Everybody
right.
is at a certain fitness level, but there are those players who dominate match after match after match because they understand how to actually play the game of tennis. So, you know, and it's a learned thing for most kids. I mean, most kids don't walk onto the tennis court understanding strategy and tactics, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the other the other thing that I try to kind of instill in parents, and it kind of goes with your question. So, a lot of times, parents like they want me to work on strategy and without having the technical base. So that's why the technique has to precede strategy, right? If I tell the kid, okay, execute this pattern, and then I have the tools to execute it, then it doesn't do any good at all.
Right.
So once they have some command of their shots, and then we can set up patterns. And I think one of the most important tools, and I talk about that in my book, which I used to do, and my brother and I, we used to watch tennis for hours. So watching tennis, and I tell all my students, you gotta watch a lot of tennis because it's all there. I mean, there's how many patterns are there? There's probably, I don't know, 50 patterns total in the whole game or whatever. So if you just know all of them, at least you have understanding for which shots to go for. Here's what the pros do. Okay, that's probably the way to go. And you learn that, and then the more patterns the more flexibility you have, to kind of bend your game based on who you're playing, based on the type of a player you're facing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's interesting that you're a big proponent of watching the pros play, and this is another thing I push a lot, is taking kids to college tennis matches, taking them to high school tennis matches, taking them to pro events if they're in your area, whatever, even if it's just a club tournament, taking them out to watch. But there's a productive way to watch tennis, and then there's other ways to watch tennis. So
right.
In terms of how to watch and what types of things the kids should be looking at and looking for, you just mentioned the patterns of play. I think that's a huge one, and understanding, how the various pros are using shots and angles and movement and spins and all of these different aspects of the game to create different patterns. What else should they be looking for?
A lot of I teach them actually in between my sets, like we talked about earlier. Sometimes I pull up a video that I just found, and we watch it together, and I teach them how to watch it. I'll kind of narrate, say a Federer's point, and kind of tell him like what his thought process is like. Like, he hits for example, he hits a good shot. He takes a couple of steps forward because he knows the response is not going to be great. So his mindset is always, okay, I'm going to take a little bit of time right here, take a little bit of time over there from my opponent's recovery, and all of a sudden the opponent runs out of time at the end of the point. Like things like that, and I just kind of teach him how to see those things, and of course a lot of it is attention to detail in terms of technique, because as much as I can coach and we can go totally like very, very deep in terms of getting the proper technique and the proper strokes, there are still shots that are almost impossible to drill or replicate in practice. They just happen, during the point, and you have to know how to handle them. And the only way you're gonna know if you see people, pros do it enough times, so okay, this drop shots, whatever I'm getting is crazy. Where I'm gonna put it. If you see it enough, you'll kind of know. Your thought process will be set on a correct pattern, or like on a winning pattern. And
right. And I think the key is that you actually sit down with them and teach them how to watch these matches. I think that's really important, and I don't think that's a common practice.
Yeah,
maybe I'm wrong.
Unfortunately, I don't know personally from talking to parents or even observing other coaches. I don't think that's being really taught, or maybe I'm wrong, but they're just a thing that I believe, because I know how much I personally got from watching tennis when I was growing up. Like, my brother and I would Sampras and Agassi for hours. Like, I read my book. We could literally, like, we knew every word of our announcers, and we just knew all the patterns. So naturally, when you go out to play, you know where to go. Okay, I want to be like Sampras. I want to hit that shot, and then you just kind of put yourself in their mind frame, which is ideal. Like, those guys already have a perfect mind frame of all the patterns. So as long as you can put yourself in, but also it's funny because my brother and I were growing up, and like in between or whatever after practice, we just hit one-handers just for fun, because both of us have two-handed backhands. And I learned my entire one-handed backhand, which is I would say it's very good. I mean, it's probably Division 1, I'd say level right now, because I've been just practicing. But I learned it entirely by watching. I haven't had a single lesson. Nobody explained to me how to do it at all. All I did is watch Sampras do it, and I just learned it by watching him, and now Federer and other guys. So it's very 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 effective if you just really you have to know how to focus on details and kind of deconstruct it and construct it back, on yourself.
Also, an action item for my listeners is to ask your child's coach, have they sat down and watched tennis with your child and explain to your child how to effectively learn by watching, and what things to look at and look for, and how to use that information when they're out playing themselves. And for the coaches that are tuning in, I would encourage you to take some time. I've talked about this a lot, Aleksey, how there were days where my son would go out to the court with his coach and they wouldn't hit a ball. They would spend the entire lesson time either talking or watching video or learning how to string rackets or whatever it was. And I was good with that, because the coach explained to me why it was important to have those types of lesson days. And so I think that, as long as the coach is telling the parent, look, tennis lessons aren't only about how many balls your child hits. They're also about these other aspects, and learning these other aspects of the sport and how to play the sport and how to play the game of tennis. And so I would encourage the coaches to, if you're not already, to start having those conversations with the parents of the kids you work with, and parents start having those conversations with your child's coach, because all of it goes into making a great tennis player, right?
Right, and I'll really encourage all parents who are listening to really educate themselves, and maybe watch with their kids, together, but encourage their kids to watch. There's such a incredible resource in YouTube nowadays. You can find any pro doing slow motion forehand or whatever, any shot, and you can learn from that. You can watch matches. My dad bought a VCR and would freeze frame every frame just to learn the right technique. Now you just go on YouTube and you click Federer slow motion forehand, and there'll be like 20 videos.
Yep.
So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a great idea. And so, Aleksey, we're running out of time. So before we close here, I want to just give you the opportunity to tell the audience how to reach you and how to get your book.
Yeah, so you can always reach me, ask me questions. I'm happy to help and even take a look at your kids' strokes or what have you. I can be reached via my website, which is aztenniscoaching.com, and you can find my book there as well. It's on the website, and all my information there. So feel free to be in touch with me. I'm located in Los Angeles area, so if you have around, look me up, and I'm happy to help.
Fantastic. And I'll have those links in the show notes for this week's episode. So to my listeners, be sure to check that out, whether you get the podcast on iTunes or you get it through parentingaces.com or wherever you get it, you should be able to access the show notes, and those links will be there. Aleksey, thank you so much for being with us this week and sharing your approach to coaching juniors through the development process. I always learn something from my guests, and this week is no different. So I appreciate you taking the time out to speak with us.
Well, of course, Lisa. Thanks so much for having me. Hope to speak with you soon.
Fantastic. To my listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Parenting Aces.
I'm Lisa Stone, and you've been listening to the Parenting Aces podcast for tennis parents by a tennis parent. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe to us and write a review on iTunes. For more information on navigating the junior and college tennis journey, please visit us online at parentingaces.com. Thanks for tuning in and sharing us with your tennis community.